Hello guys, how are we doing? This is Alex Spence, self-realised renunciate monk, coming right at you from the middle of the woods again. Here I am. I've got to pre-warn you, the weather is changing in England. So this is like take 5 today on this video, because it's hard to find somewhere that's sort of like undercover and it's not affected by the weather, or like the camera isn't. Not really myself. I'm quite fine, to be fair. But so I just wanted to say massive welcome. How are we doing? Hope we're all well. Excuse my ducking and diving around the woods. It all adds to the effect of the filming though. So I wanted to talk today about, this is after putting the status up the other day about any ideas for film, any ideas for videos, and how's it, what can I do, and anyone sort of reaching out for any sort of like any problems that they're going through at the minute. Well, basically someone sort of said about what to do when it becomes overwhelming, when life just becomes, that overwhelming feeling. I think I said about this the other day. I felt that feeling about how like feeling overwhelmed, and sort of like you can end up sort of badgering yourself and creating an even more like intense internal situation. And it's like, what sort of affects this? What sort of creates this to spiral out of control? How can we go to sleep perfectly fine and then wake up the next day and everything's just changed? Our internal world has changed, which means our external world sort of like is reacted to it as well. And it's a really sort of, let's just look at everything from a whole. And I'm just going to relate it to my own personal experience really as well, just from what I've gone through when it comes to feeling overwhelmed. I think to the moment of my lowest, I think when I was so overwhelmed, I was just in a room with a towel on my head in tears just because I just couldn't handle what was going on. It was just such a crazy time for me. Going under again. And I sort of can really relate to that feeling of overwhelm, absolutely. I think for me personally, a lot of it comes down to sort of like when I started learning about how my energy works within my body, and how it all sort of channels around, and how I channel it into the external world and this kind of stuff. And I remember, I think for me personally, it was a big one for not having any purpose in my life. Like it wasn't sort of like going towards anywhere, or I didn't feel like I was contributing. I wasn't sort of creating anything. My creative brain was just numbed by the grief and misery that I felt at the time for not knowing what was going on. And then I started to learn more about then I started to find out what my purpose was, and I started to learn about how energy moves through my body and this kind of stuff. And it's only become sort of like, well, say fairly recently, in the last few years, I started to learn more about how when you find something that you can sort of like really channel your energy in, that's going to create something, that's going to open up the creative capacities of your mind, and that you can sort of like, you can channel so I think when it comes to sort of like feeling overwhelmed and grief, it is like the energy hasn't got anywhere to go. So it needs to be sort of like channeled up. And I think it's when you get stagnant energy, it just sort of like festers and sort of like fumbles under the surface, and sort of creates the feeling of this overwhelm, and then which leads, this overwhelm can lead into grief and sadness, and then depression, and then anxiety, and it sort of creates all of these sort of like negative sort of feelings, So I think, as well as sort of like that sort of worrying about where the energy goes, is there anything that sort of triggers that state? Is there anything first, a thought that really sort of triggers it off and sort of sets the seed for this condition to sort of take over you? Because it all comes down to the end of the day, like our relationship with ourselves, like we always say, and how we're hard on ourselves as well. And I think when you've got so much energy to give, it's almost like you've got so much energy within you to give to the world, that if that's sort of kept in, it sort of creates all this inner yearning and churning of sort of negative energy, if this makes sense. And for me personally, it's when I started to sort of really harness what was going on within and sort of really learning about how to channel my energy into, say, my work and being sort of creative. And I sort of like, I got into this stage that I could sort of like really feel everything around me. I could feel the energy going through me and then out into whatever I was creating, whatever I was writing about. All this stuff that I'm writing on my page and everything is it's almost coming from a place that I can't even fathom really. You know, it's just an expression of what's appropriate for the now. And I think that's what it comes to when you get into sort of the feeling of overwhelm and not knowing, having so much energy. It's about finding the appropriate way to express yourself in that present moment, which is going to release it. And this is, I'm not talking about, this is when it could sort of like, this is when it can get translated into negative and positive. For me, it was like negatively, I had so much of this energy and not knowing and overwhelmed that it was channeled into drug abuse and all kinds of sort of negative like activities that was just, I won't even sort of go into detail with. But the negative activities that I was doing, it also led to me feeling even more sad and depressed and more anxious and more in the grief of like being me. So, and I think for people like us, it's having purpose. I think in general, humans, when they lack purpose, it does lead to sort of destructive habits, and it can lead to a spiraling out of control to a certain degree. But I think for people who feel like they're walking somewhere, they're going on this sort of like, they're expressing themselves in this sort of like spiritual way. I think if we lack purpose, or we feel like we're lacking purpose, we're not contributing, and we're not sort of like accessing our creative part of the brain, shall we say, and it's not being channeled, it just leads to those feelings of overwhelm. And this is all I'm saying, this just from everything that I've learned from my experience and how and I've been impacted massively from being grief ridden. I mean, I can't sort of get into words of how bad how things were, you know, so I can completely relate. But it wasn't until I started to find real true purpose and a feeling of sort of a mission or going somewhere or contributing, and then being able to sort of channel everything through me to that, which everything is sort of like, it's just, I always talk about a game changer. For me, it was a real minute when I was just, something clicked and it was just all of a sudden this energy just flew through me and I could just channel it into the whatever creativity I was doing. And it's just, that's almost like a cycle. It just keeps almost going, recycling that energy. It's going and then back into the creativity, and then the creativity sort of comes back in, and it's quite embodying, I'd say. It's quite embodying. So I think when it comes to being overwhelmed, it's a case of sort of like really looking at your life from the whole perspective, whole totality of it. And sometimes even that can be overwhelming, just looking at it like that. But just try and look at it just change that perspective. Just look at it from the respect of, like I always talk about, like a childlike perspective, in the respect, just try and be excited about uncovering something or finding out something new, which in turn is going to affect your experience of the world. and that's what it's all about, really. It's making sort of like little shifts here and there which could really impact and improve your experience. Because if you have feelings of overwhelm and grief, there's something out of place and not in line, and it's just basically, it's a process of elimination for that. I personally would try from the basics of just sort of, if I've got this all that overwhelming energy and going through me and it's sort of creating this almost dizzy-headedness, I'd just try and ground myself in any way that I can. I'd get outside, I'd get my heart rate up, and just sort of like try and one way or another just try and get it flowing that way, just to have a really a sort of like intense workout. And then I'd look at, actually prior to the exercise, I'd look at sort of like what's going on in my mind, what texture and tonality is everything inside me communicating. If I have feelings of depression and sadness, is there someone that gets angry inside? And you have like an internal angry person that's getting angry at the fact that you're sad, which leads on to ripples in a pond and almost even more agitated textures and fabrics of mind. I really hope I'm making sense at this minute in time. So I'm sort of really just free running or everything that's sort of coming out. So when you've looked at all your triggers and everything that's sort of side, well, how does everyone communicate? And is there anything that you could sort of soften down? Is there any sort of tonalities that you could turn down or quieten? Or maybe you just need, maybe it's going too slow and you need to just bring it back up to like a normal pace of, of being internally. And then sort of like look to your external world and then sort of like look to the fact of what you're doing now, how you're expressing yourself with your job. How is that impacting you? How much, is there something you could, even if you not feel like you're living your purpose, is there something you could sort of pick up or try and learn, or you could sort of try and channel your energies into creating something which could get this energy flowing through you? Because that's what it's all about, I think, is just the fact that when you have all, like I say, when you have all these going off inside you, when you have this grief feeling, it's something not being, there's a blockage somewhere that's sort of like creating this. And this could stem back, I'm very looking at this from sort of like, I don't really know in depth about everyone's having a different subjective experience. I'm sort of relating it to my experience. So this could be there could be stuff that stems back from your childhood, which is still there, or still like what internal conflict it was created when you were younger. Is there any situation where something happened and that sort of situation has been suppressed and forgotten about and needs to be raised to the surface and dealt with and let gone of? And that's why even this can be just such an overwhelming thing. So it's always about just breaking it down. If you're feeling overwhelmed and depressed, just start with one thing. Just make one change. And if that doesn't work, just try something else and just play around with it. And it's like Alan Watts always said, like, just play the game. Don't take it too seriously. Just play this game as it is, just sort of like play around with life. It's not always going to be fixed in one go. There's not always going to be like, you're not always going to have that one shift that changes everything. You're not always going to find that straight away, but you can take little action each day. Each time you feel grief or sadness, try and play around with something. Just change anything. Whether that's the thought processes, maybe that's how you exercise, maybe that's how you are in the world, what creative stuff you do have in you, or how it's like channeled, like what are you focusing on? But I hope this sort of resonated, and please put any comments below, please. I'd love to hear more about this, because this is such a common trend which I'm sort of experiencing at the minute. This feeling of sort of like, well, it's the isolation and the grief and the sort of sadness which can come from where we are, and this whole awakening procedure. It's such a massive thing, and it's something that needs to be dealt with. Really, we need to sort of like, this is a serious situation, even though it's all about being a game, and we've got to try, and it sounds a bit of a contradiction like I've said, but this is a serious matter, but we have to go about it in a not serious way. Okay, so I've spoken for far too long. I'm going to sort of like leave this now, but I hope it's all about bringing people's awareness back. I hope I've said some things that might trigger you to be more aware of what's going on, just to try some different things, just to be aware of how you think, how it impacts you, how you move your body every day of every minute, how you express yourself physically, how is that to your best intentions and best ability and best impact on you. So just some more pause for thought, and this is Alex Spence leaving on a not so serious note by saying thank you very much for joining me. I'm here in the middle of a forest, ducking and diving from the rain. I love you all, and peace out, and God bless, and I'll see you tomorrow.